I was sitting in Mr. Thompson's mahogany-paneled office when he cleared his throat and read the words that would shatter my world. I leave my entire estate, including the family home and Walker Construction Company, to my beloved son, Ryan James Walker. My brother's smug smile stretched across his face as I felt 28 years of sacrifice crumble around me. But when the lawyer looked up and said, "However, there's one more document," everything was about to change. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Joy Walker, and I used to believe that love meant putting everyone else first. Growing up in our cozy suburban home in Portland, Oregon, I was the daughter who stayed close while my older brother Ryan chased his dreams in Seattle's tech scene. I was the one who drove Mom to her chemotherapy appointments when she battled breast cancer 3 years ago. I was the one who moved back home when Dad's arthritis made it impossible for him to run Walker Construction Company alone. I was the one who gave up my nursing career, my apartment, my independence, to make sure our parents never felt abandoned in their golden years. Ryan, on the other hand, was the golden child who visited twice a year, sent expensive gifts instead of time, and somehow always managed to be too busy with his software development career to help when things got difficult. Yet every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, Mom and Dad would beam with pride talking about their successful son in Seattle, the one who'd made something of himself in the tech world. I suppose I should have seen the writing on the wall, but when you're the child who stays, who sacrifices, who loves unconditionally, you don't think about being forgotten. You think about being valued for your devotion. Our family home was a modest 2-story house with a wraparound porch that Dad had built himself back in 1987. The kitchen still smelled like Mom's Sunday morning pancakes, and the living room walls were covered with decades of family photos. Dad's construction company had been his pride and joy for over 30 years. Walker Construction wasn't a massive operation, but it was respected throughout Portland for quality work and honest pricing. Dad had always talked about passing it down to one of his children, though he never specified which one. I had assumed, perhaps naively, that since I was the one who'd spent the last 5 years learning the business, handling the books, managing client relationships, while Dad's health declined, that I had inherited at least a portion of his legacy. I had postponed my dreams of opening my own home healthcare agency to keep Walker Construction afloat. I'd used my nursing background to coordinate care for elderly clients who needed modifications to their homes. I'd even developed new service lines that combined construction with health-focused home improvements. The morning of the will reading, I woke up in my childhood bedroom, still decorated with the pale yellow wallpaper Mom had chosen when I was 12. The September sunlight filtered through lace curtains, creating patterns on the hardwood floor Dad had installed himself. Mom had passed away peacefully in her sleep just 6 weeks earlier, following a stroke that came without warning. Dad had followed her exactly 2 weeks later, as if his heart simply couldn't bear the separation. I made coffee in the kitchen where I'd spent countless mornings with Mom, listening to her stories about Dad's courtship, her advice about life, her gentle wisdom about finding my own path. She'd always encouraged me to follow my dreams, even as I chose to stay close to home. "Joy, honey," she'd say while kneading dough for her famous dinner rolls, "love isn't about losing yourself in service to others. It's about choosing to share the best parts of yourself." I wish I'd understood what she meant then. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Ryan arrived from Seattle the night before the reading, pulling up in his sleek Tesla and wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month as Dad's unofficial assistant. He'd barely spoken to me since the funeral, spending most of his time on work calls or reviewing documents in Dad's study. When I tried to reminisce about our parents or discuss the future of the business, he'd give me that condescending smile he'd perfected over the years. "Don't worry about all that business stuff, Joy," he'd said, patting my shoulder like I was still his little sister playing dress-up. "I'll handle everything from here. You just focus on figuring out what you want to do next." The way he said it made my stomach turn. As if the last 5 years of my life had been some kind of extended babysitting job, rather than a genuine contribution to our family's legacy. Mr. Thompson's law office was downtown, in one of those historic buildings with high ceilings and oil paintings of long-dead judges. I'd been there before with Dad when he'd updated his will 3 years ago, right after Mom's cancer diagnosis. He'd asked me to drive him, and I'd waited in the reception area, flipping through old magazines while he conducted his business. He'd emerged looking tired but relieved, and when I'd asked if everything was okay, he'd simply said, "Just making sure you girls are taken care of." I'd assumed you girls meant Mom and me. Ryan and I sat in matching leather chairs across from Mr. Thompson's massive desk. The lawyer was a kind man in his 60s, who'd handled our family's legal matters for over 2 decades. He'd drawn up the papers when Dad incorporated Walker Construction, handled Mom and Dad's house purchase, and guided them through various business decisions over the years. His expression was solemn as he opened the folder containing our parents' final wishes. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for your loss," Mr. Thompson began, his voice gentle but professional. "Your parents were wonderful people, and they spoke of both of you with tremendous love and pride." Ryan shifted in his chair, checking his watch with barely concealed impatience. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. "Let's begin with the reading of your father's will, as it was the most recently updated document." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses and began to read from the formal document. "I, Robert James Walker, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish this as my last will and testament." The preliminaries seemed to drag on forever. Small bequests to longtime employees, donations to Dad's favorite charities, specific items designated for various friends and family members. Mom's jewelry was left to me, which brought tears to my eyes. Dad's tools were divided between several of his most trusted employees. The house's contents were to be split equally between Ryan and me. But then came the part that changed everything. I leave my entire estate, including the family home at 1247 Maple Street and Walker Construction Company in its entirety, to my beloved son, Ryan James Walker. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs as the reality settled in. Everything. The house where I'd cared for our parents, the business I'd helped build and maintain, the life I'd sacrificed my own dreams to preserve. All of it, given to the son who'd been absent for most of the struggle. Ryan's face broke into a satisfied smile, the kind he used to wear when he'd beaten me at board games as children. Except this wasn't a game. This was my life, my future, my sense of worth as a daughter and family member, all crumbling in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon. I tried to speak, to ask why, to understand what I'd done wrong, but no words came. My throat felt tight, and my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall in front of my brother. "Well," Ryan said, his voice carrying a note of forced humility that didn't match his expression. "I guess Dad knew I'd be able to handle the business side of things better. Don't worry, Joy. I'll make sure you get some kind of severance package for helping out these last few years." Severance package. As if I'd been an employee rather than a daughter. Mr. Thompson was watching me with concerned eyes, but he continued with the reading. "There are a few additional specific bequests," he said, turning to another page. "To Joy Marie Walker, I leave my mother's pearl necklace and my collection of construction industry books. A necklace and some books. 28 years of being the devoted daughter, 5 years of sacrificing my career, countless hours of caregiving and business building, and I was left with sentimental trinkets while Ryan inherited everything that mattered." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I need some air," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan barely looked up from the documents Mr. Thompson was now explaining to him about business transfers and property deeds. "Take your time, sis. This is a lot of boring legal stuff anyway." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been erased from my own family history. The Portland street was busy with afternoon traffic, people hurrying to appointments and meetings, everyone with somewhere important to be. I stood on the sidewalk, watching strangers live their lives while mine fell apart in slow motion. How had I gotten it so wrong? Had Dad really seen my years of devotion as worthless? Had he truly believed that Ryan, with his fancy Seattle job and his twice-yearly visits, was more deserving of the legacy we'd built together? Had I been fooling myself about my value to this family all along? I walked aimlessly through downtown Portland, past coffee shops and bookstores, past the park where Dad used to take us to feed ducks when we were children. Everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that I'd never really belonged the way I thought I had. By the time I made it back to the house on Maple Street, the reality was sinking in deeper. This wasn't my home anymore. These weren't my parents' things to remember them by. This was Ryan's inheritance, and I was just a temporary occupant who needed to figure out where to go next. I sat in Mom's favorite chair in the living room, surrounded by 4 decades of family memories that no longer felt like mine to claim. The photo albums on the coffee table, the quilts Mom had made, the furniture Dad had built with his own hands. All of it now belonged to a brother who'd seen fit to pop champagne while I grieved in silence. That evening, Ryan came home with takeout from an expensive restaurant downtown. "Thought we should celebrate Dad's legacy," he said, setting the bags on the kitchen table. "I've been thinking about our next steps. I'll probably sell the house and use the money to expand the business. Maybe branch out into commercial development. Our next steps." As if I had any steps left to take. "What about the employees?" I asked, thinking of the men who'd worked for Dad for decades, who'd become like family over the years. Ryan shrugged. "I'll evaluate everyone's performance and keep the ones who make sense. Business is business, Joy. Dad would understand that." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing a stranger. When had he become so cold? When had he stopped caring about the human cost of his decisions? Or had he always been this way, and I'd been too loyal to notice? "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked quietly. He looked up from his expensive meal with surprise, as if the thought hadn't occurred to him. "I figured you'd move back to your apartment and restart your nursing career. You're still young, Joy. You can bounce back from this. Bounce back." As if the last 5 years of my life had been a temporary setback, rather than a conscious choice to love and serve my family. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I thought about the dreams I'd deferred, the nursing career I'd paused, the home healthcare business I'd planned to start someday. I thought about the life I'd put on hold to be the daughter my parents needed. I thought about Mom's words, "Love isn't about losing yourself in service to others." Maybe she'd been trying to warn me. Maybe she'd seen what I couldn't see, that unconditional devotion without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was self-erasure disguised as virtue. The next morning, Ryan was already on the phone with business contacts, making plans to modernize Walker Construction with new technology and expanded services. He spoke about the company like it was his brilliant idea rather than Dad's life's work. He talked about efficiency improvements and profit margins, completely ignoring the heart and soul that had made Walker Construction special in the first place. I packed my few belongings into the same battered suitcase I'd used when I moved back home 5 years earlier. Everything I owned fit into 2 pieces of luggage and a handful of boxes. Somehow, in focusing so completely on preserving everyone else's dreams, I'd forgotten to build a life of my own. Ryan barely looked up when I announced I was leaving. "Good luck, Joy. Keep in touch, okay? Keep in touch." As if we were casual acquaintances rather than siblings who'd shared a lifetime of memories. I drove away from 1247 Maple Street with tears streaming down my face, not sure where I was going or what I was going to do next. For the first time in 5 years, I had no one depending on me, no parents to care for, no business to maintain, no family obligations to fulfill. I had nothing except the crushing weight of realizing that my parents had valued me so little that they'd left me nothing but trinkets and memories. But sometimes, losing everything is exactly what you need to discover who you really are when no one else is defining your worth. Sometimes, the worst betrayal becomes the greatest gift, because it forces you to stop waiting for permission to live your own life. I just didn't know that yet. I found myself in the parking lot of a diner off Interstate 84, somewhere between Portland and nowhere, with my car running on fumes and my heart running on empty. The neon sign flickered Rosie's 24-hour cafe in pink and blue letters, and through the smudged windows I could see truckers and travelers nursing coffee cups like they held the secrets to salvation. I'd been driving for 3 hours without any destination in mind, just needing to put distance between myself and the wreckage of my old life. The waitress who seated me had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her name tag read Betty, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been serving coffee and comfort for decades. I ordered black coffee and pie I didn't want, mainly because I needed somewhere to sit and figure out what came next. "Rough day, honey?" Betty asked, refilling my cup without being asked. There was something about her voice that reminded me of Mom, that same gentle concern that could break through any wall I'd built around my heart. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without falling apart completely. She patted my shoulder and moved on to other customers, but I caught her glancing my way with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of lost souls pass through her section. That's when my phone rang. Emma Martinez had been my closest friend since nursing school, and she was one of the few people who'd understood my decision to move back home and care for my parents. While other friends had questioned my choice or gradually drifted away as their lives moved forward and mine stood still, Emma had checked in regularly and never made me feel like I was wasting my potential. "Joy, I've been thinking about you all day," she said when I answered. "How did the will reading go?" The concern in her voice opened the floodgates, and I found myself sobbing into the phone in a roadside diner, telling her everything. About Ryan's inheritance, about feeling erased from my own family history, about having nowhere to go and no idea how to start over at 28, with nothing to show for the last 5 years of my life. Emma listened without judgment, letting me pour out all the hurt and confusion until I was empty of words. When I finally fell silent, she said something that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. "Joy, come to Denver. I've got a spare room, and I know you need time to figure things out. But more than that, I think you need to remember who you were before you became everyone else's caretaker." Denver. I'd visited Emma there twice over the years, and I'd fallen in love with the city both times. There was something about the mountain air and the sense of possibility that made everything feel larger and more hopeful. It was far enough from Portland to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that I wouldn't feel completely untethered from everything familiar. "I can't impose on you like that," I said, but even as the words came out, I was calculating how long it would take to drive there. "You're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who loves you and wants to see you build the life you deserve. Besides, my apartment is way too big for one person and I could use the company." Emma worked as a charge nurse at Presbyterian/St. Joseph Hospital in Denver, specializing in geriatric care. She'd often told me about the challenges elderly patients faced when they were discharged home without adequate support systems. It was a conversation we'd had many times over the years, especially after I'd started helping Dad's construction clients with health-focused home modifications. "There's something else," Emma continued. "I've been talking to Dr. Patricia Morrison, the head of our discharge planning department, about the gap in services for seniors transitioning from hospital to home. She's been looking for someone with both medical background and practical home modification experience to consult on a pilot program they're developing." My heart skipped a beat. It sounded exactly like the kind of work I'd dreamed about doing before I'd gotten caught up in maintaining Dad's existing business instead of building my own future. "Emma, I don't have a business license in Colorado. I don't have startup capital. I don't even have a proper resume anymore." "You have something better," she said firmly. "You have experience, passion, and the kind of insight that comes from actually caring about people's well-being instead of just treating them as revenue streams. The rest we can figure out." I sat in that diner for another 2 hours, drinking coffee and talking to Emma about possibilities I'd forgotten how to imagine. She painted a picture of Denver's growing senior population and the increasing demand for services that bridged medical care with practical home solutions. She talked about hospital systems looking for innovative approaches to reduce readmission rates and improve patient outcomes. But more than that, she reminded me of conversations we'd had years ago about the kind of healthcare business I'd wanted to create. A service that would help aging adults maintain their independence and dignity while ensuring their homes were safe and supportive of their changing needs. I'd had notebooks full of ideas back then, business plans I'd sketched out during slow shifts at the hospital, dreams I'd carefully documented before life had pulled me in a different direction. "Do you still have those notebooks?" Emma asked. "The ones where you outlined your home healthcare modification service?" I did. They were buried in one of the boxes I'd packed from my childhood bedroom, covered in 5 years of dust but still filled with ideas that felt as relevant now as they had then. Maybe even more relevant, given everything I'd learned while helping Dad's clients and caring for my parents. By the time I hung up the phone, the sun was setting over the Oregon mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of the hope I used to carry before disappointment had worn it down to nothing. Betty had refilled my coffee cup 3 more times and left me alone with my thoughts, understanding somehow that I was working through something important. I paid my check and left Betty a tip that was probably larger than necessary, but her kindness had been exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. Sometimes, angels wear waitress uniforms and serve wisdom with pie. The drive to Denver took me through some of the most beautiful country in America. Rolling hills gave way to dramatic mountain vistas, and with each mile I put between myself and Portland, I felt something shifting inside me. It wasn't healing yet, exactly, but it was the beginning of possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward obligation or duty. I was driving toward choice. I arrived at Emma's apartment complex in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood at nearly midnight, exhausted but oddly energized. Emma had left a key under the mat and a note that read, "Welcome home, Joy. Your room is the second door on the right. We'll talk tomorrow about changing the world." Her spare room was small but bright, with a window that looked out over the city lights. I unpacked my 2 suitcases and arranged Mom's pearl necklace on the dresser, the only valuable thing my parents had left me. In the morning light, it would catch the sun and remind me that some gifts aren't about monetary value. They're about love that transcends disappointment and connection that survives betrayal. Emma had already left for her early shift when I woke up, but she'd left coffee in the pot and a stack of newspapers on the kitchen table with job listings circled in red ink. Most of them were traditional nursing positions, but she'd also marked several articles about Denver's aging population and the challenges facing senior care services. I spent that first day walking through downtown Denver, getting a feel for the city and trying to imagine myself building a life here. The mountains rose majestically to the west, snow-capped and eternal, making everything else feel manageable by comparison. If people could move mountains, surely I could rebuild a life. That evening, Emma came home with Chinese takeout and a folder full of information about Colorado business licensing requirements. She'd also printed out articles about successful healthcare entrepreneurs who'd started with nothing but good ideas and determination. "I've been thinking about this all day," she said, spreading papers across her dining room table. "What if we approached this strategically? Instead of trying to start a business from scratch with no capital, what if you began as a consultant? Build your reputation, develop relationships, and let the business grow organically from there?" It was exactly the kind of practical thinking I'd lost the ability to do for myself. When you've spent years focusing on everyone else's needs, you forget how to plan for your own future. But Emma saw possibilities where I saw only obstacles. "Dr. Morrison wants to meet with you next week," Emma continued. "She's dealing with a situation where they're discharging an 82-year-old woman who lives alone in a house that's completely unsuitable for her current mobility limitations. The family is panicking, the discharge planner is frustrated, and everyone knows she'll be back in the ER within a week if something doesn't change." I felt the familiar surge of purpose that came when I could see exactly how to help someone. It was the same feeling I'd gotten when Dad's clients would describe their challenges, and I could envision practical solutions that would improve their daily lives. "What kind of modifications would she need?" I asked, my mind already working through possibilities. Emma smiled. "That's exactly what Dr. Morrison wants to discuss with you. She thinks there might be a way to pilot a consulting service that bridges the gap between medical discharge planning and practical home safety assessment." We spent the next 3 hours going through my old notebooks, the ones I'd filled with business ideas before life had derailed my dreams. Reading my own words from 5 years ago was like reconnecting with a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. The woman who'd written those plans had been ambitious, innovative, and confident in her ability to create something meaningful. I'd outlined a service that would combine health assessment with home modification recommendations, working with families to create environments that supported aging in place while maintaining safety and independence. I'd researched everything from bathroom grab bar installation to kitchen accessibility improvements, from lighting modifications that reduced fall risk to technology solutions that helped seniors stay connected with family and medical providers. "Joy, this is brilliant," Emma said, reading through my detailed business plan. "And it's exactly what the healthcare system needs right now. Hospitals are desperate to reduce readmission rates, families are overwhelmed trying to figure out how to keep elderly relatives safe at home, and there's nobody bridging that gap with practical solutions. Looking at those notebooks, I realized that my years caring for my parents hadn't been a detour from my professional goals. They'd been graduate-level education in exactly the kind of challenges I'd wanted to solve. I understood firsthand what families went through when they were trying to balance safety with independence, medical needs with quality of life, professional recommendations with practical reality. What if we started small? I suggested, feeling the first spark of excitement I'd experienced since the will reading. What if I offered to do the assessment for Dr. Morrison's patient as a trial run? No fee, just an opportunity to demonstrate what's possible. Emma's eyes lit up. Yes. Show them what you can do instead of just talking about it. And if it works well, word will spread. Healthcare providers talk to each other constantly about resources that actually help their patients. We stayed up until nearly midnight planning my approach for the consultation with Dr. Morrison. Emma helped me draft questions about the patient's medical status, mobility limitations, cognitive function, and family support system. I outlined the kind of comprehensive home assessment I would conduct, looking at everything from entryway accessibility to bathroom safety to kitchen functionality. For the first time since sitting in Mr. Thompson's office, I felt like myself again. Not the dutiful daughter who'd sacrificed her own dreams, not the forgotten child who'd been deemed unworthy of inheritance, but the capable professional who'd always known she had something valuable to offer the world. The next morning, I called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled an appointment for Thursday afternoon. I spent the intervening days researching Denver's senior service landscape, visiting medical supply stores to familiarize myself with local resources, and driving through different neighborhoods to understand the housing challenges facing aging residents. I also spent time writing. Not business plans this time, but letters to my parents that I would never send, pouring out all the hurt and confusion and anger I'd been carrying since the will reading. Writing helped me process the betrayal, but it also helped me remember the good parts of our relationship that couldn't be erased by their final decision. Mom had always encouraged my independence, even when she needed my help. Dad had taught me to see problems as puzzles to be solved, rather than obstacles to be endured. They'd raised me to be compassionate, resourceful, and determined. Maybe their final gift wasn't the inheritance I'd expected, but the character traits that would allow me to build something entirely my own. Thursday arrived with unseasonably warm weather and crystal-clear mountain views. I dressed professionally, but practically, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought years ago when I'd first graduated from nursing school. Inside were copies of my old business plans, my nursing credentials, and a detailed outline of the comprehensive assessment process I'd developed. Presbyterian/St. Joseph Hospital was a sprawling complex in central Denver, busy with the controlled chaos that every healthcare facility manages daily. Emma met me in the lobby and walked me to Dr. Morrison's office, chattering nervously about how excited everyone was to meet me. Dr. Patricia Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with short silver hair and the kind of focused energy that comes from years of solving complex problems under pressure. Her office walls were covered with charts showing patient outcomes, readmission statistics, and photos of successful discharge planning initiatives. Emma tells me you have experience with home modification assessment, Dr. Morrison said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I have to admit, I'm skeptical about most consulting services that promise easy solutions to complicated problems. But I'm also desperate enough to try almost anything that might actually help our patients. I appreciated her directness. I'm not promising easy solutions, I replied. I'm suggesting that many of the problems families face when seniors transition from hospital to home are practical ones that have practical answers. Medical professionals focus on treating the condition. Family members focus on providing emotional support. But nobody's looking comprehensively at whether the physical environment actually supports the recovery and ongoing independence we're all hoping to achieve. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, interested. Tell me about Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen was the 82-year-old patient they were preparing to discharge. She'd been hospitalized for a fall that resulted in a broken hip, followed by surgery and rehabilitation. Medically, she was ready to go home. Practically, her home was a disaster waiting to happen. She lives alone in a 1960s ranch house, with 3 steps to the front door, no grab bars in the bathroom, and a kitchen layout that requires her to reach over the stove to access upper cabinets, Dr. Morrison explained. Her daughter lives in California and is flying in this weekend to figure out next steps, but everyone's panicking because they know the current setup isn't safe for someone recovering from hip surgery. As Dr. Morrison described Mrs. Chen's situation, I could visualize exactly what needed to be assessed and what kinds of modifications would make the biggest difference in her safety and independence. This was the intersection of medical care and practical problem solving that I'd been passionate about for years. What if I conducted a comprehensive home assessment this weekend, before her daughter has to make any major decisions? I suggested. I could evaluate the current safety risks, identify the most critical modifications needed, and provide a prioritized action plan with cost estimates and local contractor recommendations. Dr. Morrison studied me carefully. What would you charge for something like that? Nothing for this first assessment, I said. Consider it a demonstration of what's possible. If the family finds it valuable, and you think it's something that could benefit other patients, then we can discuss developing an ongoing consulting arrangement. And if Mrs. Chen ends up back in the ER next week because something we missed causes another fall, then I'll reassess what went wrong and figure out how to do better next time, I said honestly. But I believe that combining medical knowledge with practical home modification expertise gives families a much better chance of successful aging in place than either approach alone. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then reached for her phone. Let me call Mrs. Chen's daughter and see if she's interested in having someone take a look at the house before she arrives. The phone call took 15 minutes, with Dr. Morrison explaining who I was and what I was proposing. I could hear the relief in the daughter's voice even through the speakerphone when she realized someone was offering a practical solution instead of just more warnings about potential problems. She'll meet you at the house Saturday morning at 10, Dr. Morrison said after hanging up. Her name is Susan Chen Martinez, and she's flying in Friday night from San Diego. She sounds like she's at the end of her rope trying to figure out how to keep her mother safe. I left that meeting with my first consulting assignment and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't charity work or family obligation. This was professional expertise being put to use, solving real problems for people who needed practical solutions. Emma was waiting in the hospital cafeteria, barely able to contain her excitement when I told her about Saturday's assessment. This is it, Joy. This is your chance to show them what you can do. What if I mess it up? I asked, the familiar voice of self-doubt creeping in. What if I miss something important and Mrs. Chen gets hurt? Emma looked at me seriously. What if you don't try and she gets hurt anyway? You can't let fear of imperfection keep you from pursuing something you're genuinely good at. Besides, you're not working in isolation. You're part of a team that includes medical professionals, family members, and other resources. Your job is to contribute your expertise, not to single-handedly guarantee perfect outcomes. That weekend would prove to be the turning point that changed everything. I just didn't know it yet. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes Denver feel like the most hopeful city in the world. I stood on the front porch of Mrs. Chen's ranch house at exactly 10 o'clock, clipboard in hand, and my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. This wasn't just a home assessment. This was my audition for the life I'd always wanted to build. Susan Chen Martinez pulled up in a rental car just as I was double-checking my notes. She was a woman in her 50s, with tired eyes and the slightly frantic energy of someone who'd been managing a crisis from 2,000 miles away. When she got out of the car, I could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. "You must be Joy," she said, extending her hand with a grateful smile. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've been losing sleep for weeks trying to figure out how to keep Mom safe in this house." We walked through the front entrance together, and immediately I could see why everyone was concerned. The 3 concrete steps leading to the front door had no handrail, and the steps themselves were uneven, probably settled over decades of Denver's freeze-thaw cycles. For someone recovering from hip surgery, those steps represented a serious fall risk every time she entered or left her home. Inside, Mrs. Chen's house told the story of a life well lived, but also of someone who'd been gradually adapting to increasing limitations without really addressing the underlying safety issues. Throw rugs were scattered across hardwood floors, creating tripping hazards in high-traffic areas. Extension cords snaked across walkways to reach outlets that weren't conveniently located for modern needs. The lighting was dim, especially in the hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. "Mom's lived here for 38 years, Susan explained as we toured the main living areas. After Dad died 5 years ago, she started spending more and more time in just the kitchen, living room, and bedroom. But she's stubborn about maintaining her independence, and until this fall, she was managing pretty well." I took detailed notes as we walked through each room, photographing problem areas and measuring spaces for potential modifications. The bathroom was particularly concerning. The shower had a high threshold that would be difficult for someone with limited mobility to navigate safely. There were no grab bars anywhere, and the toilet was positioned in a corner that made it challenging to install safety equipment without major renovation. But I also saw tremendous potential. The house had good bones, with wide doorways that could accommodate mobility aids, and an open floor plan that would allow for easy navigation once safety hazards were addressed. The kitchen had a breakfast bar that could serve as a support surface with minor modifications, and the bedroom was large enough to rearrange furniture for better accessibility. "What are you thinking?" Susan asked as I finished photographing the bathroom setup. "I'm thinking your mother can absolutely continue living here safely with the right modifications," I said, and watched relief flood her face. "The key is prioritizing changes based on immediate safety needs versus longer-term convenience improvements." I pulled out a notebook and started sketching a rough floor plan, marking areas where modifications would have the biggest impact on safety and independence. For example, installing a temporary ramp over those front steps and adding handrails would eliminate the most serious fall risk for under $500. Grab bars in strategic bathroom locations, removing trip hazards, and improving lighting in key areas would address most of the immediate concerns for probably under $1,500 total. Susan stared at my sketches with something approaching amazement. "That's it?" I was imagining we'd need to renovate the entire house or move her to assisted living. "Eventually, she might need more comprehensive modifications or a different living situation," I said honestly. "But right now, we're talking about supporting her recovery and maintaining her independence during this transition period. If these modifications work well and she continues to thrive here, we can always reassess and plan additional improvements later." We spent the next 2 hours going through every room in detail. I measured doorways, tested lighting levels, identified potential hazards, and documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. More importantly, I listened to Susan's stories about her mother's daily routines, her preferences, her personality, and her goals for this next phase of her life. Mrs. Chen, it turned out, was a retired seamstress who'd run an alteration business from her home for over 20 years. She was proud, independent, and deeply connected to her neighborhood and community. She volunteered at the local senior center, maintained a small garden in her backyard, and hosted weekly mahjong games with 3 longtime friends. Losing her ability to live independently wouldn't just affect her safety. It would disrupt an entire social ecosystem that gave her life meaning and purpose. "Mom keeps saying she doesn't want to be a burden," Susan told me as we finished our assessment. "But I think what she really means is that she doesn't want to stop being herself. This house, this neighborhood, these routines, they're all part of who she is." I understood that sentiment better than Susan probably realized. Moving back to my childhood home to care for my parents hadn't just been about duty or love. It had been about preserving something essential about our family identity, about maintaining connections and traditions that felt too precious to lose. "Independence isn't just about physical capability," I said. "It's about having choices and maintaining the things that make life feel worth living. Our goal should be to modify the environment to support her capabilities, not to change her entire life because of temporary limitations." By the time we finished the assessment, I had a comprehensive plan that addressed immediate safety concerns while preserving everything Mrs. Chen valued about her living situation. The modifications I recommended were practical, affordable, and designed to be minimally disruptive to her established routines. "When can you start?" Susan asked as we stood in the driveway reviewing my written recommendations. "I'm not a contractor," I explained, "but I can coordinate with reliable professionals to ensure the work is done correctly and efficiently. If you'd like, I can oversee the installation process and make sure everything meets both safety standards and your mother's preferences." Susan looked at me with the kind of gratitude that reminded me why I'd wanted to work in healthcare in the first place. This is exactly what we needed. Someone who understands both the medical requirements and the practical realities. How much do I owe you for today? Nothing for today, I said. But if you're happy with the results after the modifications are completed, I'd appreciate a referral to Dr. Morrison and any other families who might benefit from this kind of assessment. I drove back to Emma's apartment feeling more energized than I had in months. The assessment had confirmed everything I'd hoped about this kind of work. There was a genuine need for services that bridged medical care with practical home solutions, and I had the background and skills to provide those services effectively. Emma was waiting with coffee and curiosity when I walked through the door. "How did it go?" she asked before I'd even set down my assessment materials. "It went perfectly," I said, and realized I meant it. Susan was grateful, the problems were solvable, and I felt like myself for the first time since the will reading. I spread my notes and photographs across Emma's dining room table, walking her through everything I'd observed and all the solutions I'd recommended. Emma asked thoughtful questions about costs, timelines, and potential complications, helping me think through the practical aspects of coordinating the modification work. "You need to document this entire process," she said. "Take before and after photos, track costs and timelines, get written feedback from both Susan and her mother. This is going to be your proof of concept for other potential clients." Emma was right. If I wanted to build a consulting business around this kind of work, I needed to demonstrate measurable results and client satisfaction. Mrs. Chen's project could become my first case study, showing healthcare providers and families exactly what was possible when someone took a comprehensive approach to home safety assessment. Over the next week, I threw myself into coordinating Mrs. Chen's modifications with the same intensity I'd once brought to managing Dad's construction projects. I contacted 3 different contractors for quotes on the ramp installation, researched bathroom safety equipment suppliers, and visited lighting stores to find solutions that would improve visibility without requiring major electrical work. The process reminded me how much I'd enjoyed the problem-solving aspects of construction work, but it also highlighted how different this felt from simply maintaining someone else's business. I was creating something new, building relationships with vendors and contractors who could become long-term partners, and developing systems that could be replicated for future clients. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Morrison asking about Mrs. Chen's progress and whether I thought the pilot project was working. "Susan called me this morning to rave about your assessment," she said. She said it was the first time since her mother's accident that she felt hopeful about the future. "The modifications should be completed by early next week," I reported. "I'm planning to do a follow-up assessment after Mrs. Chen has been home for a few days to make sure everything is working as intended and identify any adjustments that might be needed." "I'm impressed," Dr. Morrison said, "and I have another patient whose family is dealing with similar challenges. Would you be interested in conducting a second assessment?" My heart leaped. A second client meant this wasn't just a one-time experiment, it was the beginning of something real. "Absolutely," I said. "What's the situation?" Dr. Morrison described an elderly man who'd been hospitalized for pneumonia and was ready for discharge, but his family was concerned about his ability to manage medications independently and safely navigate his 2-story townhouse. It was a different set of challenges from Mrs. Chen's situation, but exactly the kind of comprehensive problem that required both medical understanding and practical problem-solving skills. His daughter is a nurse herself, Dr. Morrison added, so she understands the medical aspects of his care, but she's struggling with the environmental modifications and safety considerations. "I think your perspective could be really valuable." By Friday evening, I had 2 clients and a growing sense that I might actually be onto something significant. Emma and I celebrated with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and spent the evening researching Colorado business licensing requirements and discussing the practical steps for formalizing my consulting service. "You need a name for this business," Emma said, scrolling through Colorado's small business development resources on her laptop. "Something that captures both the healthcare expertise and the practical home modification focus." We brainstormed dozens of possibilities, from formal-sounding names like residential health consulting to more personal options like home-safe solutions. Nothing felt quite right until Emma suggested Bridge Home Services. Bridge, she explained, because you're bridging the gap between medical care and practical living solutions. And home, because you're helping people stay in the place they love. Bridge Home Services. The name resonated immediately, capturing exactly what I was trying to accomplish and the value I could provide to families navigating the complex intersection of healthcare and daily living. That weekend, while Mrs. Chen's contractors installed her safety modifications, I spent Saturday morning at the Colorado Small Business Development Center, learning about licensing requirements, insurance considerations, and the practical steps for establishing a legitimate consulting business. The advisor I met with was encouraging about the market potential for my services, especially given Colorado's rapidly aging population and the healthcare system's focus on reducing readmission rates. You're addressing a real gap in services, she told me, and your background gives you credibility with both medical professionals and families. The key will be building relationships with referral sources and documenting your results so you can demonstrate value to potential clients. Sunday afternoon, I drove back to Mrs. Chen's house to check on the completed modifications. The transformation was remarkable. The new ramp provided safe, gradual access to the front door, with sturdy handrails on both sides. Inside, strategically placed grab bars, improved lighting, and the removal of trip hazards had created an environment that felt both safer and more welcoming. Mrs. Chen herself was a tiny, energetic woman with sparkling eyes and a grateful smile. "My daughter told me you're the person who figured out how to keep me in my home," she said, gripping my hands with surprising strength. "I was so worried I'd have to move to one of those places where everything smells like disinfectant and nobody knows my name." Seeing Mrs. Chen navigate her modified home with confidence and ease was better than any paycheck I could have imagined. She showed me how the new bathroom grab bars allowed her to shower independently, how the improved lighting made her feel safer moving through the house in the evening, and how the ramp eliminated the anxiety she'd felt about leaving and returning home. "The modifications don't feel like medical equipment," she said. "They feel like improvements that make my house work better for me." That was exactly what I'd hoped to achieve. Modifications that enhanced independence without announcing limitations. Solutions that felt like upgrades rather than accommodations. Susan pulled me aside as I was preparing to leave. "I can't thank you enough for this," she said. "But more than that, I want to make sure other families know about your services. I've already talked to 2 friends who are dealing with similar situations with their parents." Word-of-mouth referrals. The foundation of any successful service business, and something I was earning through results rather than marketing promises. Monday morning, I called Dr. Morrison to schedule the assessment for her second patient and to report on Mrs. Chen's successful transition home. "She's doing beautifully," I told her. "The modifications are working exactly as intended, and she's already talking about resuming her volunteer activities at the senior center." "Outstanding," Dr. Morrison said. "I have to admit, I'm starting to think this kind of comprehensive assessment should be standard protocol for all our seniors, patients who are transitioning home after hospitalization." "What would that look like practically?" I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. "It would look like having someone like you on retainer to conduct assessments for any patient where the discharge planning team identifies potential home safety concerns," she said. "We'd need to work out the logistics and funding structure, but I'm interested in exploring a more formal partnership. A formal partnership with a major hospital system. The kind of opportunity that could transform my consulting service from a side project into a legitimate business, with steady revenue and professional credibility. I'm very interested in exploring that," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "What would be the next step?" "Let me talk to our administration about the potential for a pilot program," Dr. Morrison said. "In the meantime, keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document everything, collect feedback from patients and families, and let's see if we can build a case for making this a permanent service." I hung up the phone feeling like my life had just shifted into an entirely different gear. 6 weeks ago, I'd been sitting in a lawyer's office learning that my parents had left me nothing but trinkets and memories. Today I was discussing a potential partnership that could establish my consulting business as an essential service within Denver's healthcare system. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to preserve my parents' legacy through their construction business, I'd lost everything. But in pursuing my own dreams with my own skills and my own vision, I was building something that could help families across the entire region. Emma found me that evening sitting at her kitchen table, staring at my phone with a dazed expression. "You look like someone who just won the lottery," she said. "Better than the lottery," I said. "I think I just found my calling." I told her about my conversation with Dr. Morrison, about the possibility of a formal partnership, about the growing list of potential clients who were learning about my services through word-of-mouth referrals. Emma listened with the kind of excitement that only comes from watching someone you love discover their true potential. "You know what this means?" she said when I finished explaining everything. "It means you're not just starting over, you're starting better. You're building exactly the life you dreamed about before circumstances pulled you in a different direction." That night, I called my Aunt Sarah in Portland. She'd been Mom's younger sister and the only family member who'd expressed concern about the will's distribution. She'd always believed that love should be demonstrated through action rather than just inheritance, and she'd been quietly horrified by Ryan's behavior since our parents' death. "Joy, sweetheart, how are you managing?" she asked when she heard my voice. "I've been worried about you since the funeral." I told her about Denver, about Emma's support, about Bridge Home Services and the clients who were already changing my life. I told her about feeling useful and purposeful and excited about the future for the first time in months. "Your mother would be so proud," Aunt Sarah said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "She always said you had the biggest heart and the smartest mind of anyone she knew. She worried that you were sacrificing too much of yourself taking care of everyone else." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She called me about 6 months before she died," Aunt Sarah said. "She was concerned that you'd given up too much of your own life to care for them, and she wanted to make sure you'd be okay financially when they were gone. She said Dad was planning to leave you something that would give you the independence to pursue your own dreams." My breath caught in my throat. "Aunt Sarah?" Ryan inherited everything. I got Mom's necklace and some books. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That doesn't make sense," she said finally. "Your mother specifically told me that Dad had set aside money for you to start your own business. She said it was separate from the main estate, something that would give you the freedom to build the life you'd always wanted. Something that would give me the freedom to build the life I'd always wanted." My mind raced back to the will reading, to Mr. Thompson's words right before I'd fled the office in devastation. However, there's one more document. I'd been so crushed by the inheritance announcement that I'd left before hearing what came next. What if there really was more? What if my parents had left me something after all? The phone call with Aunt Sarah haunted me for 3 sleepless nights. Her words kept echoing in my mind. "Your mother specifically told me that Dad had set aside money for you to start your own business." I replayed the will reading over and over, remembering how I'd bolted from Mr. Thompson's office the moment I heard about Ryan's inheritance, too devastated to listen to anything else the lawyer might have said. However, there's one more document. Those words had been chasing me through my dreams, growing louder and more insistent each time I woke up in a cold sweat. What if I'd made a terrible mistake? What if my parents hadn't forgotten me after all? What if I'd been so blinded by hurt that I'd missed something crucial? Thursday morning, I finally worked up the courage to call Mr. Thompson's office. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, and my voice cracked when his secretary answered. "This is Joy Walker," I said. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Thompson about my parents' will reading from last month." "Of course, Miss Walker," the secretary said warmly. "Mr. Thompson has been hoping to hear from you. Can you hold for just a moment?" Has been hoping to hear from me. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Joy." Mr. Thompson's familiar voice came through the phone, filled with concern and something that sounded like relief. "I've been worried about you ever since you left the office. Are you all right?" "I'm in Denver," I said, which seemed like a strange way to answer his question but was the only thing I could manage to say. "Denver is lovely," he said gently. "But Joy, we need to finish the conversation we started that day." There were additional documents that needed to be discussed after the primary will reading. Additional documents. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down on Emma's kitchen floor, my back against the refrigerator for support. "Mr. Thompson, I thought everything went to Ryan. I thought my parents had decided I wasn't worth including in their legacy." The silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with sadness. "Oh, Joy. Your parents loved you deeply and they were incredibly proud of the sacrifices you made to care for them. The primary will dealt with the house and the construction business, but there was a separate trust document that was established specifically for you." I started crying before he finished the sentence. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deeper than relief or gratitude. They came from the place where I'd been carrying the weight of feeling unloved and unvalued by the people who mattered most to me. "Can you come back to Portland?" Mr. Thompson asked. "Or I could arrange to meet you in Denver if that's easier. This conversation really needs to happen in person, and there are documents you need to sign." "I'll come to Portland," I said through my tears. "I can drive up this weekend." "Perfect. How about Monday morning at 10? And Joy, bring identification and anything you might need for banking purposes. We have some financial arrangements to finalize." I spent the rest of Thursday in a daze, telling Emma about the call and trying to process the possibility that everything I'd believed about my parents' final wishes might be wrong. Emma was characteristically practical, reminding me not to get my hopes up too high, while also being genuinely excited about the possibility that my parents had remembered me after all. Friday morning brought a call from Dr. Morrison about scheduling the second client assessment, and I realized that regardless of what Mr. Thompson had to tell me, my life in Denver was already taking shape in ways that felt right and purposeful. Bridge Home Services was becoming real, with paying clients and professional relationships that were opening doors to opportunities I'd never imagined. "I'll be back in Denver by Tuesday," I told Dr. Morrison. "Can we schedule the assessment for Wednesday afternoon?" "Perfect," she said. "And Joy, I've had preliminary conversations with our administration about the possibility of a formal consulting arrangement. They're very interested in piloting a program that could improve patient outcomes while reducing readmission costs." Driving back to Portland felt surreal, like traveling through a time portal that would either heal old wounds or reopen them completely. The familiar landscape of eastern Oregon and the Columbia River Gorge looked different now, viewed from the perspective of someone who'd found her footing in a new place and was returning to face unfinished business rather than running away from disappointment. I'd booked a room at a hotel near the airport, unwilling to stay in the family home that now belonged to Ryan, but also wanting to be close enough to handle whatever business needed to be conducted. Sunday evening, I drove past the house on Maple Street and saw Ryan's Tesla in the driveway, along with a real estate agent sign in the front yard. The sight of that for sale sign hit me harder than I expected. In just 6 weeks, Ryan had decided to sell the home where our parents had built 4 decades of memories, where Mom had cooked Sunday dinners and Dad had taught us to change oil in the garage, where countless family celebrations and quiet moments of love had unfolded over the years. I understood that Ryan had every legal right to sell the house, but seeing that sign felt like watching someone erase the physical evidence of our family's existence. Everything that had made that house a home was being reduced to square footage and market value. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest October weather that matched my nervous energy. I arrived at Mr. Thompson's office 15 minutes early, sitting in my car in the parking lot and trying to prepare myself for whatever revelations were coming. Mr. Thompson greeted me with a hug that felt genuinely fatherly, and I realized how much I'd missed having older adults in my life who cared about my well-being. His office looked exactly the same as it had 6 weeks ago, but I felt like a completely different person sitting in the same leather chair. "Before we begin," Mr. Thompson said, settling behind his desk with a thick folder, "I want you to know that your parents spent considerable time planning these arrangements. Nothing about their decisions was careless or unconsidered." He opened the folder and pulled out a document I'd never seen before, printed on the same legal letterhead as the will, but clearly separate from the original reading. "This is the Walker Family Trust, established by your parents 3 years ago when your mother was first diagnosed with cancer," he began. The timing wasn't coincidental. They wanted to ensure that regardless of what happened with their health, both of their children would be provided for, according to their individual needs and circumstances. He handed me a copy of the trust document, and I saw my name prominently featured throughout the text. Joy Marie Walker, beneficiary. Joy Marie Walker, successor trustee. Joy Marie Walker, recipient of assets designated for entrepreneurial endeavors. Your parents recognized that Ryan had already established his career and financial independence, Mr. Thompson continued. They were proud of his success, but they also understood that you had made different choices, sacrificing your own professional advancement to care for them during their declining health. I stared at the document, trying to process the legal language that was gradually revealing the scope of my parents' planning. The trust contains several components, Mr. Thompson explained, patiently. First, there is a cash settlement of $75,000, intended to provide you with startup capital for a business venture. Your father specifically mentioned your interest in healthcare-related services. $75,000. I had been working with a few $100s in savings and the kindness of friends, and my parents had left me enough money to properly launch Bridge Home Services, with professional equipment, marketing, insurance, and working capital for the first year of operations. Second, there's a life insurance policy that names you as the sole beneficiary, worth an additional $50,000. Your mother wanted to ensure you had financial security during the transition to entrepreneurship, understanding that new businesses often take time to generate steady income. $125,000 total. More money than I'd ever imagined having at one time. Enough to transform my consulting service from a promising side project into a legitimate business with staying power. Finally, Mr. Thompson continued, there's a provision that grants you first option to purchase your father's construction tools and equipment at fair market value, should you choose to incorporate those resources into your business planning. Dad's tools. The high-quality equipment he'd accumulated over 30 years of construction work, worth probably another $15,000 if I wanted to expand Bridge Home Services to include direct modification work rather than just consulting and coordination. Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, why wasn't this discussed during the will reading? He sighed deeply. Because the trust was structured to be activated only after the primary estate matters were settled. Your parents wanted to ensure that Ryan received the house and business without any complications or delays, but they also wanted you to have time to process the initial inheritance distribution before learning about your separate legacy. They knew I'd be upset about Ryan getting everything. They knew you'd be hurt, he said gently. Your mother in particular worried that you might interpret the will as a reflection of their feelings about your worth or your contributions to the family. She asked me to arrange the trust disclosure this way so you'd have time to work through those emotions before discovering their true intentions. I started crying again, but this time the tears felt cleansing rather than devastating. My parents had known me well enough to anticipate exactly how I'd react to the will reading, and they'd planned accordingly to minimize my pain while still ensuring I received the legacy they wanted me to have. There's one more thing, Mr. Thompson said, reaching into the folder again. Your mother left you a personal letter, to be delivered along with the trust documents. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Mom's careful cursive handwriting. Inside was a 3-page letter dated just 2 months before her stroke, written in the same hand that had penned countless birthday cards and grocery lists throughout my childhood. My dearest Joy, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means Dad and I are no longer able to tell you in person how proud we are of the woman you've become and how grateful we are for the love you showed us during our final years. I had to stop reading for several minutes, overwhelmed by hearing Mom's voice so clearly through her written words. Mr. Thompson waited patiently, understanding the emotional weight of receiving a final message from a beloved parent. We know the will reading was difficult for you, the letter continued, and we're sorry we couldn't spare you that pain. But we needed Ryan to inherit the business and house without complications, because his personality and circumstances make those responsibilities a good fit for him. You, however, have always been meant for something bigger and more independent. Mom went on to explain their reasoning for the separate trust, their recognition of my entrepreneurial spirit, and their belief that I was capable of building something more meaningful than just inheriting someone else's legacy. The money we're leaving you isn't just financial support, she wrote. It's our investment in your dreams and our confidence in your ability to create something beautiful and helpful in this world. We've watched you care for people with such compassion and skill, and we believe you're meant to use those gifts in ways that will help families far beyond our own. The final paragraph was the one that broke me completely. Dad and I love both you and Ryan equally, but we love you differently, according to who you are and what you need to flourish. Ryan needed our house and business to feel secure and successful. You need freedom and startup capital to become the person you've always been meant to be. We hope someday you'll understand that giving you different gifts was our way of honoring your individual strengths, not a reflection of unequal love. I sat in Mr. Thompson's office for nearly an hour, reading and rereading Mom's letter while he handled other business and gave me space to process everything I'd learned. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with kind eyes and a patient smile. "Are you ready to proceed with the paperwork?" he asked. "More than ready," I said, and meant it completely. The next 2 hours were a blur of signatures, bank account information, and logistical arrangements. The cash portion of the trust would be transferred to my account within 48 hours. The life insurance payout would take slightly longer but was already in process. The equipment purchase option was mine to exercise whenever I felt ready to expand my business operations. "Your parents would be so proud of what you're building in Denver," Mr. Thompson said as we finished the final documents. "When your father heard about your healthcare business ideas, he said it sounded exactly like the kind of work you were meant to do." "He knew about my business plans?" "He knew everything, Joy. Your parents paid attention to your dreams even when you thought they were focused on other things. The trust wasn't just about providing financial support. It was about enabling you to pursue the specific goals they'd heard you talk about for years." I left Portland that afternoon with a cashier's check, a stack of legal documents, and a completely transformed understanding of my parents' love and respect for me. The drive back to Denver felt celebratory, like traveling toward a future that was finally aligning with my deepest aspirations. Emma was waiting with champagne when I walked through her apartment door Tuesday evening. I'd called her from the road to share the basic details, but seeing her excitement in person made the whole experience feel real in a way it hadn't during the solitary drive home. $125,000, she said, shaking her head in amazement, plus the option to buy your dad's equipment. "Joy, you're not just starting a business anymore, you're launching an enterprise." We spent that evening planning the next phase of Bridge Home Services expansion. Professional liability insurance, business licensing, equipment purchases, marketing materials, a website, office space. All the things I'd been putting off because I couldn't afford them were suddenly within reach. More importantly, the financial security meant I could focus on building the business properly, instead of scrambling to pay rent and groceries while trying to establish credibility with potential clients. I could invest in professional development, attend conferences, network with other healthcare providers, and position myself as a legitimate expert in the field rather than a well-intentioned amateur. Wednesday's client assessment went even better than Mrs. Chen's had, partly because I felt more confident and professional, but also because word was spreading about the quality and comprehensiveness of my evaluations. The client's daughter was a nurse who worked at a different hospital system, and she immediately asked about my availability for her colleagues who were dealing with similar family situations. "You're providing exactly the kind of service that families need but can never find," she told me. "Most contractors don't understand medical limitations, and most medical professionals don't understand home modification options. You're the bridge that connects both sides of the problem." Bridge. The name Emma and I had chosen for my business felt more appropriate than ever. Thursday morning brought a call from Dr. Morrison, with news that would change everything once again. "The administration has approved a 6-month pilot program for comprehensive home safety assessments," she said. "We want to contract with you to evaluate every senior patient who's being discharged to independent living after hospitalization for fall-related injuries or mobility-limiting conditions." "How many patients are we talking about?" I asked, trying to sound professional while my heart raced with excitement. "Probably 8 to 12 patients per month. Possibly more if the program is successful and other departments want to participate. We're prepared to offer you a retainer fee plus per-assessment compensation that would make this a substantial part of your monthly income. A steady stream of clients through one of Denver's major hospital systems, professional credibility, predictable revenue, and the opportunity to help dozens of families navigate the transition from hospital to home safely and successfully." "I'm very interested," I said. "When would you like to start?" "December 1st, which gives you about 6 weeks to finalize your business setup and prepare for increased volume. Will that timeline work for you? December 1st. 2 months after I'd fled Portland, thinking my parents had deemed me worthless, I'd be launching a legitimate healthcare business with a major institutional client and enough startup capital to do everything properly. That timeline is perfect, I said, already mentally organizing everything that needed to happen in the next 6 weeks. That evening, I called Aunt Sarah to share the news about the trust and the business contract. Her reaction was a mixture of relief, joy, and complete lack of surprise. "I knew your parents hadn't forgotten you," she said. "They loved you far too much to leave you with nothing. But Joy, this is about more than money. This is about them seeing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving." "I feel like I owe them an apology," I said, "for doubting their love, for thinking they'd valued Ryan more than me." "Honey, grief makes us think all kinds of things that aren't true," Aunt Sarah said gently. "What matters is that you now know how much they believed in you, and you're proving them right by building something wonderful." Friday afternoon, I was organizing my business planning materials when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. Ryan was calling from Portland. "Joy," he said when I answered, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "I heard you were in town this week meeting with Mr. Thompson." "I was," I said carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. "He told me about the trust, about Mom and Dad's plans for your business." "Oh." There was a long pause before Ryan continued. "I owe you an apology. I had no idea they'd set aside money for you separately. If I'd known, I would have handled the will reading differently." "How would you have handled it differently?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I would have made sure you stayed to hear everything before jumping to conclusions about being forgotten." It was probably the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I was ever going to get from my brother, and I found I didn't need more than that. Ryan had received exactly the inheritance that suited his personality and goals. I'd received exactly what I needed to build the life I was meant to live. Our parents had known us both well enough to provide accordingly. It all worked out the way it was supposed to, I said, and realized I meant it. "I'm building a business in Denver that I love, and you're handling the house and construction company. Mom and Dad planned well. Are you happy?" Quote. Ryan asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded like he genuinely cared about the answer. "I'm happier than I've ever been," I said, surprised by how true it felt. "I'm doing work that matters, helping families solve real problems, and building something that's entirely mine." "Good," he said simply. "I'm glad." After we hung up, I sat in Emma's living room watching the sun set over the Rocky Mountains and thinking about the strange, winding path that had led me to this moment. 6 weeks ago, I'd thought my life was ending. Today, I felt like it was just beginning. My parents hadn't failed me. They'd launched me. The pain of that will reading had been the catalyst I'd needed to stop waiting for permission to pursue my dreams and start building the life I'd always wanted to create. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, because it forces you to discover just how much you're capable of when you finally stop living for everyone else and start living for yourself. 2 years later, I stood in the conference room of Denver General Hospital, presenting quarterly results to a room full of healthcare administrators who hung on every word. Bridge Home Services had exceeded every projection, reducing hospital readmission rates by 38% for seniors who received our comprehensive assessments. We'd expanded to serve 4 major hospital systems across Colorado, employed 12 assessment specialists, and maintained a waiting list of families requesting our services. "The cost savings are remarkable," I explained, clicking through slides that showed both financial impact and patient outcomes. "But more importantly, we're helping families maintain dignity and independence during some of their most vulnerable transitions." Dr. Morrison, now our primary hospital liaison, smiled proudly from her seat at the conference table. She'd become both a professional mentor and a close friend, someone who understood the intersection of medical expertise and practical problem-solving that made Bridge Home Services unique in the healthcare landscape. After the presentation, I drove to my office in Cherry Creek, a professional space that still amazed me every time I walked through the doors. The walls were covered with thank you letters from families, photos of successful home modifications, and certificates recognizing Bridge Home Services as Denver's leading post-acute care consulting firm. My assistant, Maria, greeted me with coffee and a stack of phone messages from potential clients. 3 new referrals today, she said with a smile. 2 from Presbyterian/St. Joseph, and 1 from a family who found us through Google reviews. Google reviews. We maintained a 5-star rating with over 200 testimonials from families who credited our assessments with keeping their loved ones safe and independent. Reading those reviews never got old, especially the ones that mentioned specific team members by name or described how our modifications had changed someone's quality of life. Emma stopped by around noon, as she often did when her hospital shifts aligned with my office hours. Our friendship had deepened into something like sisterhood over the past 2 years, built on shared purpose and mutual respect for each other's professional expertise. "Guess who I ran into at the medical conference last week?" she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with characteristic directness. "Tell me." "Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Seattle Presbyterian. She's heard about Bridge Home Services and wants to discuss bringing a similar program to the Pacific Northwest." Seattle. Ryan's city. I'd maintained polite but distant contact with my brother over the past 2 years, exchanging holiday cards and brief phone calls but never addressing the deeper wounds that had shaped our relationship. He'd successfully sold both the family home and Walker Construction, using the proceeds to invest in rental properties that generated passive income while he continued his tech career. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her you'd probably be interested in expansion opportunities, but that she'd need to speak with you directly about logistics and partnership structures." Emma was right. Bridge Home Services had grown beyond my wildest projections, but growth brought opportunities that required careful consideration. Expanding to new markets meant maintaining quality standards while managing increased complexity, something I'd learned to approach thoughtfully rather than impulsively. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Portland. Not from Ryan, but from Mrs. Henderson, one of Dad's former employees who'd stayed in touch with family friends over the years. "Joy, honey, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said, "but I wanted you to know that folks around here have been hearing about your business success in Denver. Your dad would be so proud of what you've accomplished." Mrs. Henderson went on to tell me that several Portland families had been asking about services similar to what Bridge Home Services provided. The Pacific Northwest had the same aging population challenges as Colorado, but fewer resources for families navigating the transition from hospital to home care. "There's a real need here," she said. "And people remember you as Robert Walker's daughter, the one who took such good care of your parents during their final years. That kind of reputation matters in a community like ours." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the strange, circular nature of opportunities. 2 years ago, I'd fled Portland feeling like a failure who'd sacrificed everything for nothing. Now I was being invited back as a successful entrepreneur whose expertise was exactly what the community needed. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize immediately. "Joy, this is Ryan. I hope it's okay that I got your number from Aunt Sarah. Could we talk when you have time? No emergency, just want to catch up." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Of course. Are you free this evening?" Ryan called at 8 o'clock Mountain Time, which meant 10 o'clock for him in Seattle. His voice sounded different than I remembered, less confident but also more genuine, like someone who'd spent time reflecting on things that mattered. "I've been hearing about your business," he said without preamble, "about how successful Bridge Home Services has become. Thank you. It's been an incredible journey. Joy, I owe you a real apology, not just for the will reading, but for years of treating you like your choices were less valuable than mine, because they were different from mine." I hadn't expected this level of introspection from Ryan, but I appreciated his directness. We both made choices that made sense for who we were at the time. Maybe, but I was arrogant about it. I thought success could only look one way, and I didn't respect the path you were taking, even when it was clearly right for you. We talked for over an hour, covering everything from our childhood memories to our current professional lives, to our different ways of grieving our parents' deaths. Ryan had spent the past 2 years in therapy, working through his own relationship with achievement and family dynamics. He'd come to understand that his need to be the successful son had prevented him from appreciating my contributions or supporting my goals. "I have a confession," he said toward the end of our conversation. "I knew about the trust before the will reading." "What do you mean?" "Dad told me about it when he updated his will 3 years ago." He wanted to make sure I understood that the house and business were my inheritance, but that you were being provided for separately according to your needs and interests. Why didn't you say anything during the will reading? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Because I was selfish and immature. I liked being the one who inherited the big, obvious things. I didn't want to share that spotlight with you, even though you deserved recognition for everything you'd done for Mom and Dad. His honesty was both painful and healing. I'd suspected that Ryan's reaction during the will reading had been too confident, too unsurprised, but I'd been too devastated to analyze it carefully at the time. I'm sorry, Joy. I should have made sure you stayed to hear about the trust. I should have celebrated your inheritance instead of just focusing on my own. I forgive you, I said, and realized I meant it completely. But more than that, I'm grateful things happened the way they did. If I'd known about the trust immediately, I might not have left Portland. I might not have taken the risks that led to building Bridge Home Services. You would have figured it out eventually. You're too smart and too determined to have stayed stuck forever. After we hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Ryan and I might never be close friends, but we'd found a way to respect each other's choices and acknowledge the different paths that had led us both to places where we could be proud of our accomplishments. The next morning, I called Dr. Hendricks in Seattle to discuss expansion possibilities. Our conversation was energizing and productive, focusing on the practical steps for establishing Bridge Home Services in the Pacific Northwest, while maintaining the quality standards that had made our Denver operation successful. We're particularly interested in your model because it addresses such a critical gap in care coordination, Dr. Hendricks explained. Our discharge planning team struggles with the same challenges Dr. Morrison described, and we've been looking for innovative solutions that actually improve patient outcomes. Within a month, I was traveling to Seattle twice monthly to consult on pilot projects and train hospital staff on comprehensive assessment protocols. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, requiring me to adapt our Denver systems to different regulatory environments and community resources. On one Seattle trip, I drove past the neighborhood where Ryan lived, thinking about how strange it felt to be building a professional presence in my brother's city. We'd had coffee once during my visits, a cordial meeting that felt like progress, even though we didn't discuss anything deeper than work and weather. The Seattle expansion proved successful beyond all projections. Within 6 months, we'd established Bridge Home Services Northwest as a subsidiary operation serving 3 major hospital systems and dozens of independent clients. The demand was so strong that I hired 2 additional assessment specialists and began developing training programs for other healthcare professionals who wanted to incorporate our methods into their own practices. Standing in my Denver office 18 months later, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from devastation to triumph. Bridge Home Services now operated in 2 states, employed 26 people, and had helped over 1,500 families navigate the transition from hospital to home successfully. But the real measure of success wasn't in revenue or recognition. It was in the thank you cards from families who'd maintained their independence because of our assessments. It was in the hospital partnerships that had reduced readmission rates and improved patient satisfaction scores. It was in the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful, using the gifts and experiences that made me uniquely qualified for this work. Emma found me that afternoon staring out my office window at the Rocky Mountains, lost in contemplation about growth and gratitude and the unexpected ways life can transform pain into purpose. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she said, settling into her usual chair. "Just thinking about how different everything is from 2 years ago. How completely wrong I was about what my parents' death meant for my future." "You weren't wrong about feeling hurt. You were just premature about thinking it was the end of the story." Emma was right. The will reading had felt like an ending, like final proof that my sacrifices had been worthless and my dreams were foolish. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything I'd actually wanted but hadn't known how to pursue. My parents had given me exactly what I needed. Not just financial support, but the catalyst to stop living their dreams and start building my own. The pain of feeling forgotten had forced me to remember who I was when nobody else was defining my worth. Today, Bridge Home Services bears their name in a way that honors their memory while reflecting my vision. The Walker Family Foundation, established with a portion of my business profits, provides grants to adult children who are caring for aging parents, while pursuing their own educational or entrepreneurial goals. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the gift that changes everything. Sometimes being left out of the will is actually being written into a much better story. And sometimes, when your family gives everything to your brother, they're really giving you permission to build something entirely your own that's worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.